next question, our next speaker is Daniel Brown, who's joining us from AGBU, who, for those who don't know, are responsible for all the analysis work that we do. Like Hamish as well, Daniel also pots around on his own block in his spare time, and fortunately for me, I've retired, so he's stopped beating me up playing football. But he still gives it the time when the opportunity arises. Okay, so Daniel's here today to talk about the major R&D stuff that AGBU are doing with regards to sheep genetics, and then this is going to lead into a forum where we're going to once again put the microphone in your court about what are the sort of things that you're looking for from an R&D genetics point of view. So I'll pass over to Daniel and we'll get away.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Luke. Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the current R&D that we're focusing on, and which is rolling into some changes to the routine evaluations that we're aiming to implement over the next few months. I won't cover a lot of detail. I've deliberately tried to stick to the key principles of what we're doing, but feel free to talk to me about any detail that if you want to know more about each particular area that I'm talking about. I'll finish up and touching on some of the ongoing work that we're doing and some of the things that we hope to roll out over the next few months as well, or next 12 months. So I don't want to focus too much on the detail on this slide. I'm just trying to summarise the key principles of what we're doing. We've got a series of changes which we're implementing, and I'll go through each individual thing, some of which Hamish has already covered nicely anyway, but I just wanted to highlight that these changes essentially affect every routine analysis that we do in some way. Some breeds are affected by multiple things, but all these changes are unique in most cases to each breed that we analyse. So I don't need to describe too much more the RBVs being converted to ASBVs. Hamish has already covered that nicely for us. The technical committee has recently resolved that the RBVs are the best estimate of the breeding values for those animals and the most complete estimate that we have. So we're rolling them out as ASBVs, and that'll flow through to the indexes on all these animals as well. The individual RBVs will be used in all index calculations, which will be our best estimate of the genetic merit, but they will be subject to change. We are actively working on RBVs for all the traits that we have genomically assisted breeding values for. So they are likely to change as we improve the way we actually handle the genomic data and as things improve in the system. There was also part of our reproduction analysis. We currently, as Hamish mentioned, don't have mating modules in place for all our softwares, and so that means what we're doing for reproduction records is essentially using the lambs to generate information about grouping on ewes, and in some cases that's a bit problematic, and we have actually found an error in one of our programs, and we had in our reproduction we actually want to account for whether lambs lambed at 1 year of age or not. This has a lifelong impact on reproduction rate. We actually found a mistake, so we had to fix that, and it is going to have a small effect for those people who are looking at particularly the yearling reproduction ASBVs. So I'm going to use this style of graph a couple of times, so I will just take a second to explain it. Essentially what we have here is the correlation of breeding values between two runs. On the x-axis we have breeding values for the current analysis, and then essentially for a new analysis where we fix this reproduction problem. These are yearling number of lambs born ASBVs, and we essentially have different levels of accuracy. So the first graph is all animals, down to the last graph here, which is the highly accurate size for reproduction. I just want to draw your attention to the fact that if you are looking at yearling reproduction breeding values, there will be some slight changes as we fix this mistake in our software. But generally, the correlations are still quite high. And if we look at yearling number of lambs weaned, as in the adult breeding value, we see that the correlations are quite good. So essentially, we're not changing the ranking very much for the number of lambs weaned. It's just those younger age traits that you'll be seeing some changes in the breeding values for. So one thing we also noticed when we made that change is the genetic trend for those yearling number of lambs weaned breeding values also changes quite significantly, and actually we see that the new analysis is giving us a greater trend for yearling number lambs weaned, which is telling us that we're doing a better job of our breeding values, but we don't see much of a change in the actual number lambs weaned ASBV, that adult trait, because the correlations aren't that high between these two traits. So, moving on to what changes we'll see in the merino run. Hamish has already talked about the changes to indexes, which we'd like to implement in the next few months. But the major other change for the merino breeders are those that are using the visual trait breeding values, that's the wrinkle and dag breeding values. We've actually changed that analysis to include genetic groups. Genetic groups are an important part of our analysis to allow us to count for differences between flocks or strains or even breeds in some case, and we currently haven't been fitting those genetic groups in our analysis because we didn't have enough data. These traits are only really recorded in the last few years, but now we've got lots of industry flocks and lots of research flocks recording these traits, so I've been able to improve that analysis and account for those flock effects, we call them, and mostly it's strain related effects. So when we look at the data, we actually have enough flocks in that system now to fit 100 groups. So that's 100 flocks get their own genetic merit as a starting point. So essentially the impact of that is that for some flocks, their breeding values actually don't change very much. They're full pedigree flocks with lots of linkage. They don't see much change, but there are a small percentage of flocks, less than 20% of flocks will see a significant change in their breeding values, and that's essentially their average genetic merit for those traits will deviate more from zero and become either more negative or more positive for wrinkle, for example. The other trait in our analysis that's routinely reported is dag, and that is affected less by this change, but we still do see some significant changes for some individual flocks. Just again to show you what the ranking of animals looks like, I've just pulled out here early breech wrinkle for the highly accurate size, and you can see that generally that ranking from the two analyses are quite similar and things are ranking generally the same. In some cases there are some flocks moving up and down because of those genetic group effects. So there will be some changes for those visual trait ASBVs. Moving on to what sort of changes we're seeing in the maternal and terminal runs. One of the important things that we have done is actually included more adult weight records. Especially in maternals and terminals, there's been a lot of people recording ewe weights at joining, and they've been put into Pedigree Wizard and other softwares, but we haven't actually been using those as adult weight traits. We've actually gone and collected those up and put them into the analysis, and there are quite a lot of those adult ewe weight records in the system. Just to summarise how many animals are affected by, we have about 10,000 new records for adult weights in a terminal run, and that means about half them, about 5,000 more animals have an adult weight record going into the analysis. So we will see some changes for those animals, and the similar number in maternal is slightly less. There's about 3,000 animals with adult weights now being used for those animals. In our current analysis, we only use one adult weight. We're actually changing that to include repeat adult weights in the near future, so we'll actually be making use of those 15,000 records in their entirety. So we will see changes over time in those adult breeding values. Again, just to summarise the effect of that, these are the adult weight ASBVs from the latest terminal analysis, and you can see that the adult weight data is changing their adult weight breeding values slightly, but if we look at the index level, essentially there's very little change in the ranking for carcass pus, for example. So breeders won't see a big change unless they're looking at adult breeding values in detail. Another thing that we'd like to implement in the maternal run is the inclusion of actual slaughter data for carcass weight, fat and muscle. Particularly in the CRC INF flock, there's lots of carcass data which we're actually not using for the maternal analysis. There's also a range of other research flocks that have been conducted over time where we have that slaughter data in the system. We haven't actually been using it for ASBVs. So we're going to turn that on, so that'll allow us to have an impact on the correlated traits that are reported, like post-weaning fat and muscle and obviously post-weaning weight. So we also want to look at using that data in the future for our single-step analysis that Hamish was talking about, and we know there's important correlations between those traits and, say, eating quality. So we want to be able to take those into account in the future for our ASBVs. And just finally, I'd just like to quickly mention the changes for the Dooney analysis. In the past, our breeding values for number lambs weaned for the Dooneys has been essentially based on correlations with other traits, but now they've been put a lot of effort into recording reproduction records directly, and we're going to actually use them and turn them on for the Dooney analysis so that the Dooney breeders will see direct reproduction information being used for their ASBVs, and that'll have a significant impact on their reproduction ASBVs, but also the index. And also we're making some changes to the American run, the NSIP run that Hamish mentioned runs. We're going to update the way we handle the standard weights, the different production system in the US, and then the weight for ages are different, so we need to take account of that better, so we're going to make some enhancements there as well. So I guess to summarise those changes, there's been a range of things that we're trying to implement there to improve the ASBVs for a range of traits, and it will affect breeds differently. And I guess that across the whole database there's not huge changes, but for individual traits and individual groups of breeders there will be some changes, particularly for those people that are joining new lambs. There'll be some change for the yearling reproduction records and their ASBVs. We'll also be obviously using those adult weights, so there'll be some changes to adult weight breeding values, and there'll be some changes for some flocks for the visual traits. So we expect to see changes, but we've gone to a fair bit of effort to validate these changes and make sure that we think we're producing, or can show that we're producing better ASBVs as a result. So I'd just like now to briefly touch on a couple of the things that we're currently working on in the research and development of the ASBVs. I won't talk about all these, I'll just briefly mention a couple of them first. We've obviously for a number of years now been working on molecular informed breeding values, or using genomic information to improve our breeding values. That's an ongoing process, and we're working hard at the moment in developing what we call a single-step analysis, where we include all the genomic information and all the breeding value, all the phenotypic information in one time to produce the best breeding values we can, and others will talk about that more throughout the program. We also made some advances in our reproduction analysis. We're working hard to do a better job with reproduction, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second. And another key part of our work has been lifetime productivity. We want to make sure that we're doing a good job of selecting for productivity throughout the entire life of an animal, and we've done a fair bit of work on fleece weight and fibre diameter and also body weight, looking at understanding those issues, and I'll talk about those briefly in a minute. We're also actively working on Sheep Object. This is software we use to estimate breeding indexes for a range of breeding objectives, and we're actively working on that at the moment to try and improve the way we account for feed, and also improving the way we account for flock dynamics and things like litter size, and I'll talk more about that as well as we go through. And we're also working on developing new traits. In particular, we want to do a better job of our eating quality traits and producing ASBVs for a range of new traits for eating quality in particular. So if I just touch on reproduction and lifetime productivity a little bit more, we spent a fair bit of effort working with breeders and trying to do a better job of handling ewe lambs, or yearling reproduction performance. And that's an ongoing process, and we've seen lots more breeders actually joining ewe lambs, and we are working towards producing an enhanced reproduction analysis, which I'll talk about shortly in a bit more detail. But recently we spent a lot of effort looking at pregnancy scan records, and at a recent technical committee meeting we resolved to start using reproduction records in our analyses. So for those to be used, we need them to come through a mating module, so we have things like joining dates and ewe management groups and the information that Hamish was talking about. So if breeders have reproduction records, we can start using those if they don't have lambing records, but they need to come through the mating module so we can use them appropriately. So that's I think a good step forward, and the results from using pregnancy scanning are very encouraging, and I think offer a lot of opportunity for people to do a better job of improving reproduction rate. The other thing that we're working on is actually separating the number of lambs weaned into its component traits of fertility, litter size and lamb survival. And we can show for a number of reasons that is better from an analysis point of view, and also helps us do a better job of developing breeding objectives appropriately. If we actually analyse these components separately, we can actually model each trait better in our analysis. We can make use of breeders' data better. For example, the breeder might know about fertility and number of lambs born, but not know about survival. So we can, in the current system, we actually don't use a lot of that data, but if we had the components modelled individually, we can include that data. So it gives us better flexibility for using breeders' data. And we also can show that the economic values for each of those component traits differs depending on what breed you are, what your production system is, and what your average litter size might be. And Andrew Swan's tried to quantify that. I hope you can sort of see this graph. It might be a bit hard, but essentially what we have here is on the x-axis mean litter size for a flock, and we have the economic values. So that's the economic importance of each of these component traits. There's a line here for lamb survival, ewe fertility and litter size. And I guess the main thing we want to demonstrate is that depending on what the average litter size is, it might change how important economically each of those component traits is. As litter size gets higher, the economic value for litter size declines. Obviously you get to a point where you don't want more lambs, but it's more important to actually have those lambs surviving. So we've done a fair bit of work to understand these issues and want to actually develop breeding objectives using those component traits going into the future. So that's something we're working on, and hope to have a prototype analysis out in the next 12 months, doing a better job in that area. The other thing that we've spent a lot of time on, as I mentioned, is lifetime productivity. We've looked at the data in the database for fleece weight, body weights and fibre diameter. And we're also looking at including younger age measurements from post-weaning age. I just want to quickly summarise some work we did in the Merino Select database, looking at the fleece weight and fibre diameter records. Merino Select at times is criticised for having too much focus on young age measurements, particularly a lot of people are recording at yearling age these days. Even though our analysis can handle adult records, it's not recorded very commonly. Only about 25% of our animals recorded in Merino Select actually end up with an adult measurement. That's females, and actually only 3% of rams, obviously a lot of them are sold, but only 3% of rams actually get a repeat or an adult measurement. So we wanted to understand this in more detail and actually work out what the value was of having repeat measurements of lifetime or adult performance. We also wanted to look at how much genomics might be able to help us in this area. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but I just want to summarise the fact that in the Merino Select database we have many thousands of records throughout adult ages, and we have over 1,000 records of adults in the Merino Select database. So that gives us a fairly powerful data set to go and look at these issues in, which is great. One of the key findings was that the heritability of fleece weight and fibre diameter changes over time, and we see that actually the heritability, which is the red line here, is higher at adult ages. And also the phenotypic variance, which is the variation between animals, essentially is higher as well. So that means that there's more genetic variation in the animals we're looking at adult ages. That gives us more power to make genetic progress for these traits, which is, I think, a very important outcome of looking at this. I don't want to again go through the details, but I just want to summarise the correlations that we estimated between those ages and point out a couple of key things. The first is that yearling has a correlation with adult performance of about, say, 0.7, which means that yearling measurements are a very good predictor of adult performance. They're not perfect. Adult goes up to about, say, 0.8. So again, it's a good predictor of adult performance, but not perfect. And that means if we're interested in lifetime performance, we really need to measure it. But essentially, the correlations between adult ages is very high, 0.9 or better. So that means essentially one adult record is sufficient to select for lifetime fleece performance. So I just want to touch briefly on the economic part of that analysis. We actually tried to estimate the economic gain from measuring various combinations of fleece measurements. We have a range of indexes we looked at: a high fleece weight, a sort of balanced index, or or a fibre diameter based type index, and we looked at the value of genomic selection in that mix as well. But the main message was that there's clear benefit from an economic point of view of actually recording at least one adult measurement. There wasn't a lot of gain from going and measuring repeat adult measurements. So, but there was obvious gains in measuring at least one adult expression of those traits. So I've just said that we want to encourage breeders to record adult measurements. There's clear gains from a breeding program point of view and an economic point of view to actually recording adult traits, and clear benefits in gain in both fibre diameter and fleece weight. But there wasn't a lot of benefit in measuring extra records past one adult record. The correlations aren't one between ages, so there is opportunity to improve the breeding values by measuring more traits, but the benefit cost is pretty small. There was obvious benefits. I haven't showed you results in measuring using genomic selection as well. Essentially, genomic selection was somewhere in between using yearling and adult, but it was definitely still beneficial, even with genomic selection, to measure adult records. We also have spent a bit of time recently looking at adult weight. As I said, there's lots of adult weight data in the system as well for all the merinos, terminals and maternals. So we've spent a bit of time trying to understand that. And essentially the message was very similar, that if you're interested in mature size, then it's valuable to measure at least one adult weight. The correlations between ages again were very high, between adult ages that is, and also the correlations between times of the year was also very high, which is encouraging for us. And we could show that there's a clear benefit in measuring at least the adult weight if mature size is of interest. But not much obvious benefit in recording more than one adult weight. We've also had a lot of condition score data in the system, and we've spent a bit of time looking at that, but we're still going to work out the value of condition score from a breeding program point of view, and also when the best time to measure it is. So essentially the conclusions of that is that in sheep genetics we can already handle an adult weight measurement, but people aren't really measuring it enough, we feel, and we'd like to encourage breeders to record adult fleece traits and also adult body weight. And we're in the process of modifying overs to make use of those extra adult weight and adult fleece measurements if people have them. So if people are recording them, even though we're saying you only need one, we will make use of at least two or more of those. Probably 3 adult weights and fleece records. So essentially we feel that most of the gains possible in these lifetime productivity traits can also already be captured by the sheep genetics evaluation system. And I've basically already said that, but I just want to touch on the post-weaning wool traits as well. We know that breeders want to record, some breeders want to record fleece weights, fleece traits earlier in life, and we're working on modifying the system so it can handle post-weaning wool traits as well. So that will help breeders collect data at all the important times of an animal's life. Just briefly to touch on a few of those other things I've already partly mentioned, but we're working on Sheep Object to help us account for things like the cost of feed through our breeding program in a more efficient manner. We're also working on those ASBVs for meat quality. We're working on that single-step analysis that Hamish mentioned and trying to do a better job of those traits as ASBVs, but also we're actively started on trying to understand how we incorporate those meat quality traits into a breeding program, and particularly in our indexes. And we've done some work to look at some of that already, and we hope to be able to start producing indexes that take account of meat quality in a more meaningful way. We're also aware that we're always asking breeders to do more, and there's also always more options like genomic selections out there for breeders to make decisions about, and we're actively trying to work on ways to develop tools to help with breeding program design. And other people will talk about some of those things today, but that is something that we're trying to help breeders in producing tools to design breeding programs essentially. So I guess just to finish off, in summary, essentially the changes we're implementing in the runs Might seem like a lot, but essentially there are a few small things generally to improve the quality of the ASBVs. I'd like to encourage breeders to essentially get the data to us if they have it. We're trying to make better use of adult fleece weights, body weights, and fibrinometers and other fleece traits. We want to use pregnancy scan records to improve reproduction rate, but we need the data to come in through a mating module with the appropriate information with it. And we're going to try and make use of post-weaning fleece data. So if the people are recording fleece traits at a younger age, please let us know so we can actually make the best use of that data. Essentially, our whole R&D program is about producing more accurate ASBVs for a wider range of traits, and I'd appreciate hearing about any feedback people have about the ASBVs and how we might be able to improve the system. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. Okay, any questions? Okay, we'll just ask when you do get the microphone, if you can just stand up and just your name and where you've travelled from to join us today.
Liz Nardi, I've come to Darwin in South Australia. Just a question following on from Hamish with the incorporation for trying to split down the reproduction records. You mentioned the likelihood of being able to implement the scan data, and I'm just questioning why Hamish said that was going to go into calculating birth type. I just wonder whether we actually need another breeding value for the earlier number of fetuses that were there rather than birth type, because you're actually going to looking at fertility, litter size and survival. You're breaking it down into those three traits.
Yeah, so that's something we spend a lot of time looking at. So firstly, using scanning records, we've looked at those in comparison to people that have been mothering up and actually looked at the relationship between scanning and number of lambs at birth. And we can show that genetic correlation is basically 1, very high. So there might be some fetal loss and things going on, but scanning is a very good predictor of number of lambs born. So it tells us about fertility and also number of lambs or litter size. So we've shown that they basically are equivalent to mothering up records. So we're pretty confident we don't need to add a breeding value for, say, a number lamb scanned as a different trait, because we think it's the same traits basically. And that will lead straight into using PEG-scan and some information about survival to capture the component traits in our enhanced reproduction analysis what we're working on. So what we're trying to do is use scanning as a measure to improve number of lambs weaned as it is now, and we can show that we can do that confidently. And it will also then feed into using that same information to doing the enhanced bit, which is the breaking up into component traits. Does that answer the question?
So the actual fertility, litter size and survival won't necessarily be reported separately?
No, we still haven't resolved what we'll report, but we know that we can use pregnancy scan to inform both what we're doing now and what we do with the component traits. And then we'll have to work out how we report that. But from a genetic evaluation point of view, pregnancy scan will help us with both those things. But the reporting of the breeding values is probably something we haven't resolved yet, once we've got those components.
Yeah, Daniel, Andrew Baisley, up with the Cobar and the Scrub. Just got a question about the adult information. Are you better off to, say, measure the 3-year-olds each year, or just do all your adults once every sort of 4 or 5 years?
Yes, that's a good question. What I forgot to say was firstly that we're encouraging people to do a U-weight or mature weighted joining, and obviously to measure all the animals that are present then. And we're going to use all the data. While technically we can show you don't really need to do that whole range of age groups, we figure if people are measuring all their age classes at joining, we'll try and use 3 or 4 of those records across age. But you could just do your 3-year-olds, and that will capture most of the benefits from the breeding program. But we're setting up the system so we can handle all the ages, all the major ages anyway. So we're encouraging people to record all the age groups that are there at joining.
Do it each year.
Yeah. Yeah. You'll get benefits from it. That information will flow through the breeding values and improve the accuracy of the breeding values. There's no doubt. Even though we're suggesting that you don't need to do it, The correlations are not perfect across ages, so you will get benefits from recording that information.
How does that apply to fleece? Sorry, just to continue the same question. That's body weight. How does that apply to the fleece component?
Exactly the same.
But you haven't got that point in time where you're joining the body weight, so yeah, shearing's a little more awkward. The question is that when they're 3-year-old once, or when they're doing every 3 or 4 years and capture them all, is there any difference between those two systems?
Well, it's essentially the same reply. While you technically don't...
There's a much larger cost for the fleece side of things than there is a body weight.
Yes, that's right. So what I would say from a breeding program point of view, the benefit cost suggests that you should do at least one adult. So that would be, doing your 3-year-olds or whatever the age category might be. But for those breeders that are doing all their adult ewes, we'll make use of the data and you'll get benefits from the breeding program. I'm not going to suggest that you're going to get your return on your dollars, but we'll use the information and make the best breeding values we can.
Yeah, Alan Piggott from South Australia. With the reproductive traits, can we include information about external influences? And you were talking about condition scoring, whether that can be incorporated to get a more accurate indication of how reproductive values are. But also, where we're doing AI or single-sire mating for ram turns out of head data or whatever, can that be incorporated to give a better indication of the reproductive ability of our ewes?
Yeah, so we've spent a fair bit of effort over the last few years trying to take account of some of those external influences, like failed service sires. But part of the push for a mating module is to get more information about joining, the whole process of joining, right from day dot, and getting information about sort of drug use and synchronisation, AI, ET program, the whole lot, to do a better job of taking account of all that noise in the system. I guess that, yes, when we get data through a mating module with more information attached to it, we'll be able to do a better job of taking account of that. At the moment we do some of it, but it's a bit challenging, like I mentioned, to get some of the data from the lambing records as we want it. So we're definitely working on doing a better job. The other thing is the bit about condition score. That's why I mentioned it. We're now trying to work out, we can show condition scores quite heritable, and we've spent a bit of time understanding it as a trait, but we've now got to work out what values is add to recording condition score and what correlations it might have with reproduction rate and other things. So I guess those other things are on our radar to look at. We've got quite a lot of data in the system now, but we have, in the mating module that's going out, we have allowed for a body weight and condition score at joining to try and capture that data so we can actually work out the best way to use it in sheep genetics.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Alder. 2 questions. One in...
Just a bit closer.
One's in relation to reproduction. Where AI is used, there's quite a sequence of failures of ewes that fail to conceive to AI, that fail to conceive to the next natural service the following year. And the other is that what is the best time to take the adult body weights in relation to the management year? So
I just spent a lot of time, if I can do the second question first, I just spent a lot of time analysing data that we have from industry flocks and particularly the sheep CRC information nucleus. And we looked at weights taken at different times in the reproductive cycle, and the genetic correlations, which are the important bit from an ASBV side of things, was very high between those ewes at different time points. So that was encouraging from an ASBV point of view. The correlations of the ewes, the weights might be changing over time, but the genetic correlation of the animals within each group remained very constant over different times of the year. So we're encouraging breeders to do adult weights at joining time, where we have good information about groups and we know we can minimise the effects of things like previous lactation, previous weaning events on those adult records. So while they could be recorded at any time of the year, joining seems like the best time from sheep genetics point of view. And I've just forgotten the first question.
First one was about AI to...
Oh yeah, so we have gone to a bit of effort to quantify, compare AI matings to natural matings. We know there's lots of things going on there. We are actively trying to get better data to actually answer that question. I guess my conclusion at the moment would be that we think the correlations between AI, reproduction and natural joining is good. We don't know if it's very good or bad or not so good. We think it's quite good, but we don't really have the data in front of us to answer that question well enough. And we'd like to have more data come through the mating module that we've been talking about so we actually quantify that better. But when we have looked at it, the correlations have been quite good, but we'd like to do more work.
Wayne Johnson at Roadwood, south of Colorado. Some of the figures here, like the using it in an economic valuation in the commercial industry, like you've got your weight of the ewe, and then you've got the number of fetuses scanned, that then translating that through into an economic benefit to the commercial client, being the number of lambs supplied and the weight of those number of lambs supplied, and you can easily do that with a number straight away now, by dividing them, i.e. ewe weight divided by the scanning will give you a number to start with, and then the weight of the lambs at weaning comes back to that ewe and gives you another number for that ewe. I suppose that's the economic side of the more than anything, and combining them would be a more useful number than just getting individual weights of a ewe, because there's obviously flocks that are of different sizes, and then using that doesn't really come through to a number that we can use. So it's more R&D and
Yeah.
I
Yeah, that's right. And I guess that there's a number of ways to approach it, and we actually are looking at other ways to capture the benefits of reproduction and those lifetime productivity type traits. So I take your point on, and we are actively trying to do a better job of it across the board.
Okay, so what I want to do is that, given that this next session is on R&D sort of genetics and what you're looking for moving forward, I'm going to keep you up here if that's all right, Daniel. I'll also bring up Hamish as well. So effectively what we're going to do is just really come up with 4 or 5 major things, I guess, that are ideas or areas for research that Daniel sort of touched on, just you as a breeders, how you sort of value those. So some of the traits that I've got is obviously the things like the new traits, so eating quality and things like that. How do you sort of see them being, obviously as they go to ASBVs, do you envisage that long term that's something that will be rolled into selection indexes as well, or?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we have been looking at the eating quality in more detail lately, and I think that there's some, I don't know if others are going to talk about it, there's some key correlations between the current traits we use and eating quality, and we need to make sure we account for those in our indexes. But we also, I come to the conclusion that we need some sort of measurement of those, be it phenotypes or genotypes, to actually be able to select for eating quality independent of yield. Otherwise, they're genetically quite linked and antagonistic, some of those. So I think there's in my mind a clear need for us to not only to take account of eating quality in our indexes, but also have a system where there's ongoing measurement of these key traits so we can do something about them.
So is there anyone in the room that's sort of at the moment currently using the eating quality RBVs in their selection, things that are looking to sort of implement them a bit further in terms of that we could go to? Someone like Steve Bill maybe would
Wake up.
There's too many large.
easy target, mate.
Yeah. What's the like that?
That's it.
Thanks, Luke. I think I'm sitting out amongst a small group of breeders down here that are actually looking to implement eating quality into either into an index or certainly looking at it as part of the selection. We are doing it, that in our own situation. The time frame thing is still the problem. With getting between selection of young rams, getting the eating quality information back, getting the RBVs back, prior to use as rams, prior to joining. So we've, perhaps a little later than last year, we took some bloods. Joining's actually over, those young rams have been used, and I haven't got RBVs back. So that's still the issue, is the time issue with this to use this information.
When did you sample them? When did you take the bloods?
Christmas time. Yeah. Beginning right in the first week of January or something. So, but we basically done a selection based on ASBBs. There's some historical information on sires that we had on their RBVs that gave us a little bit of hope, but it's still a bit of a punt into the wind and just see what happens. Yeah.
I'll let Hamish respond to that.
Steve knows I'd love to respond to that one, don't you, Steve? So for those of you, I guess, who aren't aware, the turnaround time at this point in time for our, from us receiving the blood cards to being able to get genomic breeding values back to people is 10 weeks. So if everything goes according to plan, we can do it in significantly less than that, but given the logistics of getting the samples to the labs in the US that process them and getting breeding values calculated once we've got those results back, we can't guarantee it in less than a 10-week turnaround time. At this point, we are looking at getting a lab in Queensland to do some of that work, which will shorten up some of those timeframes, with less risk of things being held up in customs on the way through to the US and so on. I'm pretty sure, Steve, you would have been able to get blood out of lambs before Christmas time.
I can explain that. There's a thing called a standard accreditation, just threw everything out of the whole thing out of whack.
Okay, it's all my fault.
It is.
But in all seriousness, that starts coming back to the recommendations to look at the top 20% of your young rams. So if we can start identifying those rams earlier on in life, so for example, once we've got our weaning weights in the system, if we can start looking at identifying a reasonable proportion of the mob that have a reasonable likelihood of going on to be sires. We're not going to be able to narrow it down at weaning to the top 4 or 5 individual animals, but if we can narrow it down to the top 20% of animals and we DNA test those, by the time they're 3 months old, we should have information back to people before the time they're 6 months old, and it allows you to make those selection decisions in time to know which ones you're interested in using by the time you've got ram lamb 7 months of age, and you can use them over a proportion of your use.
Does that affect your contemporary group too much if you just select the top 20% of your drop?
I might just pull that one up because that's part of Steve Lee's talk with Sabo, so I don't want to give you nothing to talk about this afternoon. Troy,
Troy Fisher from South Australia. It's a question for Daniel. So the RBVs still have quite low accuracies. They're getting better all the time. But I guess my question is, do they meet the same reporting threshold standards that ASBVs do, or is that work in progress?
Yeah, no, they'll be subject to the same thresholds, and I guess that you're generalising by saying they're low. I would think they're very high for some traits. So it's a trait-by-trait basis. The accuracies are quite good for a lot of traits. Some traits really are lower, but they'll be subject to the same accuracy threshold. So if they essentially don't have enough information to make the current reporting thresholds, then they won't be reported.
Dawson.
Yeah, Dawson Bradford. Just a comment on Steve's situation to start with. We've found exactly the same thing, getting the results back. To start with, you've got parentage results, then you've got 7, 8, 10 weeks, whatever it is, to get them back, make the selection, another 10 or 12 weeks to get you young size, valuable RSBVs back. It's not working. But my main question is the economic value of some of the component traits. I noticed in the one on fertility of the number of lambs that it drops off radically. And you're going to apply that to, there's many other traits we could look at, and the one that comes to mind is the mature body weight for maternal, extremely important, I think. And I'd like to a little bit more idea of how you go about assessing the economic value, and also eating quality is going to come into this. We're just talking about yield as compared to intramuscular fat. Which one should we pursue harder? I know it's a process. I'm more interested in yield than intramuscular fat at the moment.
Yeah, that's the challenge, is that, you know, obviously yield's important and people get paid for yield, but there are some very strong antagonistic relationships with eating quality. So as an industry, we need to manage that. And I agree with both your previous points. Obviously, we want to do a better job of our economic modelling for a range of traits. And obviously, one of the reasons that I'm pushing people to record adult weight is that mature size issue. And for some people, it's a big issue, and we want to do a better job of not only recording it, but also using it in our breeding programs and our indexes.
I guess it's also just important to mention that the breeding values themselves are calculated independent of the economic value behind them. So obviously, you know, if people have got those breeding values, they can make up their own mind about how much emphasis, you know, they should be putting on that individual trait. The economic values are important when it comes to combining those to produce an index that's going to have a particular impact on whatever breeding objective. So, you know, that's obviously the stage where the valuation of traits becomes important. The sheep object model that is being used to develop indexes is being upgraded at the moment to do a better job of you know, being able to handle, you know, feed requirements throughout the year and that sort of thing. So that is being further developed. In the short term, for us to be able to get eating quality breeding values incorporated into indexes, you know, there's not, you know, particularly strong market signals for us to be able to say this is exactly how much an extra percent of intramuscular fat is worth, for example. So I think in the short term, it will probably have to come into the indexes as more of a desired gains type of a methodology in the short term, so that we know that we're staying, you know, above those sort of industry thresholds where people are actually going to stop valuing land. Sam may want to contribute now or later on in the day.
No, I was just going to say Richard will be talking about that later on this afternoon, or this morning before lunch, about how those economic values have been defined.
Daniel, maybe another one based on the area of reproduction in terms of some of the breeders in the room that have very fertile sheep, accelerated lambing, and sort of, is there people here that are getting 2 lambs from a ewe, 2 separate lambing events in a year, and how we best handle that?
Yeah, it's something that we've been asked to look at for a number of reasons. We have a number of breeders in Australia with accelerated lambing. Currently in the sheep genetics evaluations, we allow 1 reproduction event per year per ewe, and we've looked at ways of actually capturing that. So it's something that we need to work on from the American evaluation as well, because there's lots more accelerated lambing in some breeds over there as well. So it's something that we've thought about, and technically it's probably not that big a challenge, but I think it comes back again to having the right reproduction data recorded through a mating module. If anyone's got a complicated reproduction program, then we need to capture the data correctly through a mating module so we can actually do something about it.
Lynn, you're I guess a breeder along this, but is this something that sort of at the moment is in your system, or if there was the ability to implement it, would you?
Our accelerated lambing that caused an issue this year was due to a ram getting in with a mob. With a mob of ewe lambs. Now, they didn't lamb when the rest of the mob had lamb at the time we wanted them to, so we wanted to record those sheep as dry, and then we felt also that it needed to be recorded into the system that that ewe actually lambed in that year. So that was where our problem came from.
Yeah, we're not currently set up very well to handle that, and it's a problem for us. But you know, we essentially need to capture that data as accurately as we possibly can, so we can then do something about it. And I guess that's why we've been pushing now for a fair while to get data through a mating module system, so we can actually filter that out or deal with it more appropriately.
Tom Silcock, Western Victoria. Hamish, have we got an ability to actually deal with the turnaround of the DNA sampling? Like at the moment you've got a calendar you provide sheep genetics members with for when their data's got to be in for getting results back, etc. can't we do something similar perhaps to the DNA? Because like obviously one of the critical issues is we run into that Christmas period and the holiday period, as well as the issue of US. But I just sort of challenge you, I guess, have we got the ability to say to participants, if you get your DNA in by such and such a date, you will definitely get results by a certain date? Because people are spending a lot of money committing to this, and they just need to be able to have the certainty they're going to get results by a known time.
So Tom, I think, we're communicating as best we can, but the time frames are 6 weeks to get our parentage results back, 10 weeks to get our 12K results back, and the breeding values that follow on from that. As I said, moving things to UQ instead of being processed directly by GeneSeq in the US should hopefully give us some capacity to shorten those time frames up to some degree. So I guess people need to plan ahead as much as possible, and I guess we just need to keep communicating out to people that these are the turnaround times that we're able to do things in, and there's other independent organisations involved in the process that we have to get to do work for us. So it limits our ability to shorten those time frames up further.
Can you maintain those times, regardless of Christmas?
Yes. Yep, I think Christmas before last, I think there was 1 or 2 cases where it didn't quite work out because there were things held up in customs. Was the main issue. This last Christmas, the only one that I'm aware of, maybe I haven't been aware of others, the only one that I'm aware of that was outside of the 10-week turnaround time, we got the results back to people literally the following day. So the results, instead of going out on the Friday afternoon, went back out on the Saturday afternoon.
Okay, we'll just go to Nev and then come back here to Troy before going to Corinne.
My question relates to the way that the breeding values and indices, particularly in the terminals, jump around quite considerably, and wondering if you could just briefly enumerate what some of the management issues might be that cause that within flocks, and also whether we could use genomics to be able to establish a more reliable assessment of any introduced sires, please.
We'll go to Daniel just for a quick answer there, and then we'll move on. That's all right.
So I guess we do know that breeding values do change over time. We have spent a lot of effort looking at the large-scale changes and also looking at how things change over a long time period. And on average, things are very stable. But individuals go up and down depending on what data's come in and when. And there's the management things that can affect that, I suppose, is things like partial submission of data and things being submitted then changed over time. I guess that we prefer to have things come in as a complete drop when everything's been recorded fully. But I don't know really how much you might want to add to that. Other sort of on-farm things can help with that, but we do try and take account of that in a range of ways in analysis. And our review of that is that on average things are very stable over the longer term.
The other thing that can happen on farm is obviously management grouping, making sure that we're accounting for environmental differences, paddock differences and so on effectively at that point in time when data comes in. It's not possible for me to stand up in front of the group here and say in general why animals have changed by a significant amount. If they have changed by a significant amount, we need to deal with that on a specific basis and look at that animal and go back through the diagnostics for that animal to say what has changed in the analysis if this animal has changed significantly. As Daniel said, it's not a common occurrence. Big changes that are outside of the norm that you would see just because you've got a bit more information coming in, they don't happen all that regularly. If it is happening, we need to go through that on a case-by-case basis and say what's driving this change. is there new information that looks like it hasn't been management groups properly? Is it partial data submission? What's driving those changes? So we've certainly got the diagnostic tools there to go back through on an individual animal basis and see what's driven those changes.
So,
genomics help to alleviate those sort of problems when you're considering sire introduction.
Genomics will give us more information, so we will have higher accuracy breeding values at that same age, and there's not going to be a paddock effect on genetic information. So, I guess in terms of having higher accuracy breeding values there, you're less likely to see changes.
but that depends again where the animal's coming from. Obviously our genomic works, which others will talk about today, but our genomics relies on having essentially genetic linkage to our population which we're predicting from. And if it's a totally unknown sire, genomics won't offer us nearly as much as if it's a sire from a flock we know something about, obviously. So there's a bit of a balance there as well.
We'll just go to Troy and
Quick question about heterosis. Obviously lots of maternal composites, quite a few high profile terminal composites. Do we account for heterosis in the analysis, and should we not?
Yeah, so we've spent a fair bit of time looking at that, Troy. Obviously our terminal and maternal data sets are becoming more and more composite in nature. For example, I recently looked, I think it was the 2012 drop was about 50% of the animals had more than one breed composition. So it's something that we've been aware of, and it's sort of a benefit of the system, and it allows us to have a crossbreed breeding values by having all that linkage. But then it brings those problems which we've tried to account for us in our current analysis in two ways. We have genetic groups based on breeds, so we're trying to account for the sort of the base breed merit there, and then we try and adjust for heterosis for the key traits. In particular, in the maternal, we account for the key traits plus reproduction. In the terminals, we don't actually adjust for heterosis for reproduction traits, which may be the only real issue that I've got at the moment. So we do actively try and correct for it.
Yeah, Frank AGBU, yes. Question for Hamish. I guess it's a reiteration of the problems we have as a producer regarding selecting the sort of top 20% of lambs, ram lambs to be tested. You need the information back by the time the oldest are sort of probably 6.5 months, and the youngest with a 5 and 6 week mate are barely pushing 5 months. So for us to be able to have some confidence in selecting the top 20% when the a 5 or 6 week gap in lambing, and some are twins, some are single, some might be triplets. That's the problem the producers have, really, of sort of working out which ones to test. You don't test the whole lot, and that's expensive. So I guess that's where some of the room might feel that the whole turnaround time is sort of going against what we're trying to do.
Yep. I won't. Sorry to butt in there, Brent, but I won't. If it's all right, I'll leave that one to Steve's talk to Savo, Brent, if that's okay, given that that's a lot of his recommendations that he's implementing in his talk. It's about how to best handle some of that information with what to test and in what doing in that 20% that you genotype. That's all right. So just to finish on one on post-weaning fleece traits, I mean, there's a couple of merino breeders in the room that are using that. How, at the moment, is that a tool, or having ASBBs, but will that impact on your business? Chad, do you no comment, or Andrew? Do you use post-weaning fleece tests at the moment, or is it something you'd implement if it was available?
Yeah, we probably would, but we do all ours at yearling at this stage, and that works with our management. It's an interesting one, this one of doing yearling measurements, and I guess my question there would be, I'd have no problems with doing post-weaning, and I know speaking to Mark Mortimer a while ago and a number of others, is that how bigger accuracies will we pick up by the time we get to 2 and 3 year old? We've actually had a major culling program. There's only a limited number of those used in the system, and the accuracies that we pick up from there would be my concern going forward. And I have no problems doing it post-weaning. And yeah, if Daniel could tell me, how much accuracies we pick up with limited numbers of sheep that are specifically bred for, all the traits we want anyway, there'd be a limited group left.
So it's obviously we've always pushed to get as many animals measured out of the group at that first assessment as possible. So that's one of the main reasons I see for implementing post-wedding fleece traits is to capture that complete drop of measurements early, then account for selection that might happen till they get their next assessment. So obviously if animals are being measured later in life for the first time and being selectively measured, then it's a problem for our breeding values. We encourage people to measure at least one sex in their entirety if they can, and that helps account for the any sort of biases. But it's definitely a big issue. But I think post-wedding fleece traits will help us by accounting for selection more than having highly accurate breeding values for later in life. We anticipate the correlations to be even lower than what I've showed you today for yearling because of those early age effects, and we'll need to account for things like age, birth type, rare type and maternal effects to get good predictions of later age performance. And there's other research projects actively collecting this data now to give us those estimates of those parameters that we need to implement that properly. But I see it as a tool, but we're still pushing people to measure at later ages to get the most accurate breeding values.
Doug Pickett from Bigger. So in the Merinos, you're sort of asking that we record micron and fleece data on their first shearing. Is that what you're saying? Or?
Yeah, well, if it depends on the breeding. Obviously, everyone's got different breeding programs, but we're encouraging as many animals to be recorded in their entirety, the whole group measured for those fleece traits before they're culled or selectively recorded at older ages. So we're encouraging people to record the complete drop as early as they can, I guess. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Look, I think that's been some really good discussion to start the day, but I am going to pull things up there as it is morning tea time.